At 1:47 in the morning, someone walked up to an 84-year-old woman's front door and disconnected her camera. 41 minutes later, her pacemaker went silent. By the time her family realized something was wrong, she was already gone. Her name is Nancy Guthrie. She is 84 years old, living alone in Tucson, Arizona. She's a mother and a grandmother. And as of today, which is day 79 since the case started, nobody knows where she is. Not the FBI, not the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Nobody. This is the full story of what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The evidence, the suspects, the theories, and the details that most people covering this case have gotten wrong. Stay with me. Before we get into what happened, I want you to know who Nancy Guthrie is. Because in cases like this, it's easy to get caught up in the investigation and forget that there's a real human being at the center of it. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She was 84 years old when she disappeared. She married a man named Charles Guthrie, and together they had 3 children. A daughter named Savannah, a daughter named Annie, and a son named Cameron. You might recognize the name Savannah Guthrie. She's the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognizable faces in American morning television. But to Nancy, she was just her daughter. In 1988, Nancy's husband Charles died unexpectedly while on a mining exploration trip in Mexico. He was only 49 years old. Nancy was left to raise 3 children on her own. She did it. She kept going. She moved the family to Tucson, Arizona in the early 1970s, and she had been there for over 50 years. That was her home. By the time she disappeared, Nancy was living alone in the Catalina foothills, a quiet suburban area just outside Tucson. Her family described her as mentally sharp and completely independent. She managed her own life, her own home, her own schedule. But physically, Nancy had limitations. She needed daily medication for a chronic condition. She had mobility issues serious enough that, according to the sheriff, she could not walk 50 yards by herself. Think about that. Whoever took Nancy Guthrie didn't just take a person. They took someone who couldn't fight back. Someone who depended on medication to survive. Someone who was completely physically vulnerable. She was also a devoted churchgoer. Every Sunday, she would stream her church service. It was part of her routine. It was one of the things that kept her connected. That routine, that single missed Sunday service, is actually what set off the alarm that something was terribly wrong. Now let's walk through exactly what happened, minute by minute. On the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared, it's Saturday, January 31st, 2026. At 5:32 in the evening, Nancy calls an Uber. She's going to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. A normal Saturday night, a family meal. We don't know everything that was said over that dinner, but what we do know is that at 9:48 p.m., Nancy's son-in-law, Tommaso Ci, Annie's husband, drives Nancy back to her home in the Catalina foothills. At 9:50 p.m., the garage door closes. Ci drives away. That is the last confirmed time anyone saw Nancy Guthrie alive. What happens next is a window of almost 4 hours that investigators have been trying to reconstruct ever since. At 1:47 in the morning, Sunday, February 1st, Nancy's doorbell camera is disconnected. The FBI would later release footage recovered from a neighboring camera showing an armed individual, masked, gloved, approaching Nancy's front door. This person knew exactly where that camera was. They walked up to it and they turned it off. That detail alone tells us something important. We'll come back to that. Think about this. The camera goes dark at 1:47. The pacemaker app goes silent at 2:28. Exactly 41 minutes. What happened in those 41 minutes inside that house? Nobody knows. That Sunday morning, Nancy was supposed to participate in a live-streamed church service. She didn't show up. Around 11 a.m., a church member called the family to let them know Nancy hadn't appeared. At 11:56 a.m., relatives arrived at her home and searched the property. No Nancy, but her phone was still there. Her medications were still there. her personal belongings still inside. Everything she would have taken if she had left on her own, still there. At 12:03 p.m., the family called 911. At 12:15 p.m., Pima County Sheriff deputies arrived. Within hours, investigators noticed something else. Something that turned this from a missing person case into a criminal investigation almost immediately. There was blood. Nancy's blood, found at her home, confirmed to be hers. And that was when everything changed. By February 2nd, just one day after Nancy disappeared, the Pima County Sheriff's Department officially shifted the case from a missing person situation to a full criminal investigation, and they called in the FBI. Sheriff Chris Nanos was direct with the media. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that investigators believe Nancy was taken from her home against her will, possibly in the middle of the night. He said, quote, "She couldn't walk 50 yards by herself." Think about what that means for this investigation. Nancy didn't walk out of her home. She couldn't have gone far on her own. Someone moved her. Now let's go through the evidence piece by piece. The masked figure. On February 10th, FBI Director Kash Patel personally released surveillance images and a short video clip showing an armed individual outside Nancy's front door at the time of her disappearance. The figure is masked, wearing a pair of gloves. Here's what's interesting about the gloves. Investigators found a glove at or near the scene. The DNA profile on that glove appears to match the gloves worn by the masked figure in the surveillance footage. And according to investigators, those gloves may have been purchased at Walmart. Now, you might think, okay, that's a lead. That's something to trace. But here's where it gets frustrating. The DNA profile from the glove did not match anything in the national database, which actually leads to a dead end. The ransom notes. Multiple ransom notes appeared in the weeks after Nancy's disappearance. They weren't sent directly to the family, they were sent to media outlets. TMZ received one, a local Arizona outlet received another. Former FBI agents have described this as highly unusual. Typically, kidnappers communicate directly with the family. Sending notes to the media suggests either someone who wants public attention or someone who is deliberately trying to control the narrative. The notes demanded payment in Bitcoin. A deadline of February 9th was given and passed, with no confirmed payment from the family. Savannah, Annie, and Cameron released a public video on February 4th. They were careful with their words, almost unusually careful.
She is without any medicine. She needs it to survive. We too have heard the reports about a ransom letter in the media. As a family, we are doing everything that we can. We are ready to talk. However, we live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know, without a doubt, that she is alive and that you have her. We want to hear from you, and we are ready to listen. Please reach out to us.
Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer made a fascinating observation about this video. She believes that Savannah deliberately used specific words, possibly mirroring language from the ransom notes, to try to communicate directly with the kidnapper on their level. Coffin-Daffer suggested the kidnapper may see themselves as being in a godlike position of control, controlling not just Nancy's life, but the entire Guthrie family's life. That is a chilling psychological profile. The DNA investigation. This is where things get complicated, and this is something I haven't seen covered properly anywhere else. DNA was recovered from Nancy's home in the early stages of the investigation. A private lab in Florida, one that works with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, has been analyzing it. That lab recently sent its samples to the FBI for analysis using advanced new technology. But Sheriff Nanos was honest about the timeline. He told a neighborhood watch group that it could take 6 more months to fully isolate the DNA strands and identify what investigators need. 6 more months. And that's just one lab. There are 5 labs across the United States currently working evidence from this case. Genetic genealogist Cece Moore pointed out something else, something nobody else is talking about. The surveillance footage shows the masked figure with what appears to be a flashlight in their mouth. Moore said that saliva from that flashlight could potentially still be at the scene, and that DNA found in saliva is hardy. It survives. She said the crime scene investigators may not have swabbed the exact right spot to find it, not out of negligence, just because in a house like that, knowing where to start is genuinely hard. Think about that image. Someone standing outside an 84-year-old woman's front door in the middle of the night with a flashlight in their mouth and a mask on their face, gloves on their hands, about to go inside. They planned this. They prepared for this. Now I want to talk about Tommaso Ci, because this is the part of the story where a lot of people have gotten carried away, and I want to be careful and fair here, but I also want to give you the full picture. Tommaso Ci is married to Annie Guthrie, Nancy's daughter. He is Nancy's son-in-law, and he is the last known person to have seen Nancy Guthrie alive. On the night of January 31st, he was the one who drove Nancy home from dinner. He was the one who watched her garage door close at 9:50 p.m. He was the last person to see her before she vanished. In the early days of the investigation, journalist Ashley Banfield reported on her podcast that a law enforcement source told her Sienna might be a prime suspect in the case. That word, prime suspect, spread everywhere. Annie's car was taken into custody during the investigation because Nancy had been in it that evening. People online went into a frenzy. Theories exploded. Videos went viral. Headlines screamed about Ci being the key to everything. But here's what you need to know. Authorities cleared both Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Ci. The family has not been named as suspects. On April 13th, former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer addressed this directly in a live stream on X. She said, and I'll give you her words, she was talking about Annie, and by extension, Tommaso. Coffindaffer was clear she does not believe they had anything to do with this. Now, does that mean every question is answered? No. The fact remains that Tommaso was the last person with Nancy. The fact remains that whoever took her did so roughly 4 hours after he dropped her off. The fact remains that investigators spent time early on examining that connection very carefully. But the last person to see someone alive does not equal guilty. And here's something else I want to highlight, because it shows just how bad the situation has gotten for Annie and Tommaso. As of this week, they have put up no trespassing signs outside their home. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has had to increase police patrols, both near Nancy's home and in the area where Annie and Tommaso live. People have been showing up at their house. An 84-year-old woman is missing. The family is grieving, and people are harassing them at their home. I also want to address something that's been all over social media, and this is important if you care about getting the truth. There is a network of spam websites and Facebook pages, later traced to Vietnam-based content farms, that have been publishing completely fabricated stories about Tommaso Ci, stories about police blockading his home, stories about him being surrounded by law enforcement, all fake, all manufactured clickbait, designed to get engagement from people following this case. I'm telling you this because if you are researching this case, watch what you click on. Not everything you see with a dramatic headline is real. The real story is complex enough without the fiction. So where does everything stand as of today? It has been 78 days since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Let me say that again, 78 days. That is nearly 3 months. No suspect has been named. No person of interest has been publicly identified. Nancy has not been found. The investigation is still active. About 24 Pima County and FBI investigators are still working this case. The DNA is still being processed, possibly for another 6 months. 5 labs across the country are involved. The glove DNA did not match the national database. The ransom deadlines have passed. The $100,000 FBI reward is still on the table. The family's own $1 million reward, announced on February 24th, is still on the table. Savannah Guthrie spent 2 full months away from the Today Show. She stepped down from her duties, including coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics, to be in Tucson with her family. She returned to the Today Show on April 6th. Her producers have reportedly set up strict procedures to handle any breaking news about Nancy's case if it were to happen while Savannah is on air. Think about that. Going to work every day not knowing if your mother is alive. Sitting in that anchor chair, smiling at the camera. In late February, authorities briefly detained a man in Rio Rico, a short drive from Nancy's neighborhood. They searched a house. No arrest was made, no sign of Nancy, but the messages keep coming in. As of April 6th, media outlets are still receiving messages from people claiming to have new information about the case. Former FBI agents say that at this stage, most of those are people seeking attention, but investigators have to check every single one. The tip line is still open. The FBI's Phoenix office has asked the public, if you have real actionable information, call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-490-100. Alright, I've laid out the facts. Now I want to tell you what I actually think about this case. Because there are a few things that keep coming back to me, details that I can't stop turning over in my mind. First, the camera. Whoever did this disconnected that doorbell camera before they did anything else. That was step 1. That tells me this person knew the camera was there. They had either been to that property before, or they had done surveillance in advance. Second, the pacemaker. The 41-minute gap between the camera going dark and the pacemaker app disconnecting, that is a strange window of time. It suggests that whatever happened inside that house took nearly 40 minutes. Either the kidnapper searched the home, or there was some kind of struggle, or it took time to move someone because remember, she could not walk 50 yards on her own. Moving an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility in the middle of the night without being seen by neighbors, without making noise, that requires more than one person, or a very specific plan, maybe both. Third, the ransom notes. The notes went to the media instead of the family. In my opinion, that says one of two things. Either this person wanted public attention, they wanted to watch the story unfold on TV and online, they wanted to feel the power of it, or they were trying to create confusion, making investigators and the family chase a narrative. They were controlling. The Bitcoin demand fits into this too. This isn't the profile of a desperate, disorganized criminal. This person knew how ransom payments work, and they chose a method that is very hard to trace. And fourth, the most important question, is Nancy Guthrie still alive? Here is the uncomfortable reality. Nancy is 84 years old. She has limited mobility. She requires daily medication for a chronic condition. If she has been held captive for 78 days without consistent access to that medication, that is a serious medical concern. The fact that the family is still offering $1 million, the fact that the FBI is still working the DNA, the fact that investigators are still canvassing, they are still treating this as a rescue operation, and I choose to hold on to that. Nancy Guthrie spent 50 years in Tucson. She raised 3 children on her own after losing her husband. She was sharp, she was independent, she was stubborn in the best way. If there is anyone who has the will to survive something like this, I have to believe it's her. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts, please contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The FBI is offering up to $100,000 for information, and the family is offering $1 million. This case is still open, the story is still developing. I will be covering every update on this case as it comes in, so if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. I want to hear from you. What do you think happened to Nancy Guthrie? Do you think she's still alive? Who do you think is behind this? Drop it in the comments. Let's talk about it.